Now, we are being joined by Mac McClarty, the former White House Chief of Staff to President Bill Clinton. Thank you very much for your time today. Now, what do you think of the setup of the two war rooms that have been set up in the White House and the Eisenhower building? Is this yet another blurring of lines of the use of government for politicking?
It would have been better had President Trump and his team set the war room up, I think, in their campaign headquarters as opposed to the White House. So I think it's in a gray area. It's my understanding that his campaign is paying for all of the costs associated with it, which is certainly, I think, essential and imperative. But I think it could have been handled in a better manner than it is. Whether it will have any real impact on the campaign is another story.
Right. Mark, this has been one of the most divisive campaigns that we've seen, to very different candidates, to very different approaches, at a time with these unprecedented challenges facing the U.S., considering the coronavirus pandemic, the racial unrest that we've seen this year with the Black Lives Matter protests. In your view, how will these two very different challenges lead the country through these times?
Well, you framed the landscape very well in terms of the powerful and indeed unprecedented challenging issues that are facing our country and largely facing the world and other democracies around the world. So the United States is not unique, but certainly those are powerful forces here that affected the election and affects the American people in their daily lives and in their political system. I hope what we see out of this election is, one, there was an overwhelming turnout, and it was really across all kinds of characteristics, elements, voters in our country, young, old, all incomes, all makeup. So that is a powerful statement in and of itself, that people care about their democracy and want to express their view. Number two, I think there is a feeling with this coronavirus, somewhat of a return to humanity perspective, what's really important in our lives as we move through this challenging period. So whether that can translate into some measure of unity after this election, time will judge. But I do think that it was noteworthy and important that the large voter turnout, and today there have not been any irregularities of any significance reported, and no foreign meddling, which also speaks well for our intelligence community. So I think a tremendous debt of gratitude go out to all the voters, but those that worked at the polls. I see that as positive, but I can't disagree with the very powerful comments you made about the forces that our country is dealing with the president. And of course, the next president will have to deal with those forces.
Absolutely. And Mark, on that, this election in so many ways is being seen as a referendum of sorts on Trump's handling of the pandemic, as well as his presidency as a whole. With what we're seeing with him winning so many of the important swing states, especially some of the areas that have been so badly affected by the pandemic, as an example, Texas, what do we make of this?
Well, I think, again, your question is a fair one and an on-point one, because unlike in 2016, when Donald Trump ran as a candidate, he clearly ran as an outsider, as a disruptor to change the status quo against Secretary Clinton, and won in a surprising victory. This was a referendum on him and his presidency, and of course the coronavirus, the pandemic, was the most important issues, at least all polls suggested that, even more important than the economy. Having said that, there were a lot of other issues that affect individual voters. We're all unique, and we see things through our prism and what's important to us. So there were cultural issues, there were economic issues. So it was not just the coronavirus, but you have to say that the country is divided about evenly, and that reflected in the vote, which in and of itself gives some suggestion that President Trump had real standing, and that people thought this coronavirus was unexpected, and that it wasn't his direct fault, and and they did not judge him as harshly as many pundits thought they might in the election.
Right. And let me ask you about the record number of mail-in ballots that we've seen. It's been about 100 million voters that turned up to the polls, well, that mailed in their ballots instead of turning up to the polls. How do you think that this is going to play out in the results?
Well, it was unprecedented in its numbers. We've always had mail-in ballots. We've always had absentee ballots. So this was nothing new. But the numbers, the volume was clearly very, very different. I think to date, taking a deep breath, the mail-in ballots seem to have worked quite well. And I think that's, again, a real tribute to our democracy and those that help make that machinery work, including poll watchers and all those associated with it, including the post office, among others. So I think right now the system seems to have worked even with that large number of mail-in ballots. And you're right, in Texas and Hawaii and perhaps in other states, you had more mail-in ballots cast that superseded all the votes cast in 2016. Of course, all of that reflected a much higher turnout, which is a very good and encouraging sign in any democracy.
Absolutely. Mark, one more thing. We have seen a lot of anxiety. People boarded up their shops in anticipation for unrest, civil unrest. This is almost unheard of in a mature democracy. What is the feeling that you get there?
Well, it's one of concern. It's one of concern because innocent people are affected by that, particularly as they struggle to restart their businesses after the pandemic, and then they're hit with this need to show signs of security and protect their establishments. So I think that is a concern and something that we're going to have to get more in tune with, better at dealing with in future elections, and not just during the election period, but more broadly. A rule of law, as your earlier guest said, that is a fundamental hallmark of any working democracy.
Absolutely. Mark, again, thank you very much for your time, and we wait to see the results.
Thank you.